Now, you might remember that we are currently investigating how economists think. In nearpod.com, if you sign into the lesson, there's the code, all right? We will be able to continue on in our investigating of how economists think. All right. Now, what will happen is we will get to the end. I've got another model I want to run through with you, and I was debating about doing it before this, all right, so I'm going to do it after, okay? We're going to then run through a model which is going to look eerily familiar to a number of you, and to a few others it's going to look a little bit scary, so we'll just be calm. Calm. All right? And we're going to then slowly work our way towards introducing what will be happening on, hopefully, Friday this week. My plan is, apologies for the distance learners, it might be a bit more awkward, okay, that we will have a live experiment in class on Friday where we are going to be testing a model, a theory, sorry, all right? You will test the theory. You're going to figure it out. Does it work? Does it not work? And why? We need to write it up as well. And that will mean that we're, being like a science. So that would be kind of cool. You might need to do it virtually. Okay. Oh, I might be able to tell you how, and which you could then get the ingredients for and do it yourself at home. That would be kind of cool. All right. Now, so how many have I got? I've got 12 registered. I might be still missing a couple. Now, also, I'm still waiting on my new learner. I haven't had the new learner added yet. 2. Yeah, there's going to be, well, there's one new learner who's supposed to be starting from new to the school. They're going to be coming in. I was assuming today. And then there's another who is wanting to come in from another subject, but because it's the option choices in their timetable, they're having to look at possibly rearranging their timetable in order to come in. So that may not happen, that one, right? But it does mean that there's an additional 2, possibly, plus our now 4 distance learners, so essentially another 6 learners, which would bring us up to more or less capacity. All right. Right. Now, so I've got 13 registered. That's okay. All right. Now, the very first thing you could have done is had a go at the positive and normative statement squares. If you have, fantastic, brilliant, well done. If you haven't, that's okay, because we can move on. I do want to just refresh in your mind, just a little bit of a review. Okay, we talked about logic. We also talked about hypotheses, and that they were thinking about cause and effect. Now, when you're doing this, you can remember have multiple tabs open. So it is possible to do notes on one and ask Dr. Google on another, and and have the Nearpod running too. You can do it however you choose. Okay. With regards to working your way through Nearpod. So a hypothesis is all about an if-then statement, and it's looking specifically at cause and effect. Right? Cause and effect. What was ceteris paribus all about? All other things being equal. The why, now for those who haven't done economics before, this is the question for you. Why would we want to keep all other things equal? What's the point of using ceteris paribus?
So you know nothing else is affecting the investigation.
Rockstar. Well done. So that we know, we have certainty that there is nothing else that is going to be affecting the investigation. that we are undertaking. That those usually two variables that we are investigating, that's the only two that are in the entire experiment. So therefore, it should follow that we're able to test and predict the future based on that particular hypothesis by keeping them protected. Okay, so here's a wee review for ceteris paribus. It is a close exercise. Fill in the gaps. See how you get on. Well done. Work. It's quite exciting doing the live and the reel all at the same time, but it does mean I need to remember to do the live and the reel at the same time. And I did get caught a couple of times when I looked at the register and thought, oh, there's somebody who's doing distance. And I had to set it all up and be a bit quicker than possibly I am normally. I had an issue this morning with the internet. I don't know if you noticed the internet being quite slow this morning. No? And it meant that I was trying to do this with a distance learner and none of it worked. And so I'm like, okay. Right. Had to almost go back to, sort of the very basics, but we managed to get there in the end. So, all right, so what you could have come up with is, should have come up with, ceteris paribus, Latin term, all other things being equal, enables us to lock our experiments to a limited number of variables to ensure that we can reliably test the hypothesis presented. That's a very fast way of saying it. What was our idea about empirical evidence? What were we talking about with regards to empirical evidence?
Basically on real world events.
Yeah, so that's your data collection. You've had a hypothesis, you're testing it, and you are collecting data, and your data is what's going to help verify your hypothesis. Okay? And it's known as empirical evidence. Apologies for my accent. And it sometimes sounds like I'm saying empirical, because it's like the empire. Yes. Okay. We've done that one. Right. We also referred to this idea here about a theory being a general relationship. So a theory isn't necessarily the truth. It is something that we can test. All right? A theory might lead to the creation of a law. It might lead to the creation of something of substance that can then be said as true. But a theory in and of itself is just a systematic way to organize the world and the information in it and to make some sense of it by way of explanation. Yeah? That's how we view it in our social science thinking, right? It may be thought of differently in other sciences, I don't know. It may be thought of differently in theory of knowledge things. I don't know. How many of those do you have? Do you have like one a week? Mind-bending stuff, I'm sure. What is true? Monday mornings, what first thing? Oh, fantastic. Gosh, that must be fun. Right? I mean, just look at the level of excitement of Kendrick, just thinking about it. Hey, Kendrick. Yeah, good man. All right. So, a theory that we are going to be exploring is a theory about utility. What we are going to be thinking about on Friday is to whether that theory is true. We are going to be looking at the idea of satisfaction. Hence the Mick Jagger reference here. All right? The idea being is that you personally, when you consume a product, you gain satisfaction from it. Hopefully. Yeah? That level of satisfaction that you gain is going to be a determining factor in whether you buy more of that product. Okay? So that's something we're going to be able to test. We're going to be able to give you a way to measure your level of satisfaction. Okay? We're going to give you a product to consume. Then we are going to test your level of satisfaction with that product. And then we're going to get you to consume that product again and see what happens. Because we're going to have a theory that says, just like this, once you've purchased the product and consumed it, you gain that utility, but then you purchase it and consume it again, and your utility actually declines. So that's what we're going to test. We're going to test to see whether the level of satisfaction you receive from consumption of a product, whether it actually declines with increased consumption of it. And it's going to sound obvious, potentially, to you. But it is fun. All right? I think. There will be some safety things that we need to consider. And I have mapped out in my head how we can socially distance do it. All right? And there's going to be representative consumers, because you can't all be doing it. There's going to be people who will be ascribing what's happening. Okay? And the rest of us will be observers. And one or two who will be helpers with regards to it. But it will need to be distanced. Okay? So we'll work that out. Okay? And I'm going to have individual utensils for it so that we're not worried about cross-contaminating people and all of those sorts of things. All right? That will be the plan. Stan? All right? It is an experiment that I have had problems with in the past. Okay? Well, one of the things I will be saying is that this is a good room for this experiment because the bathroom for you is just there. All right? It's just there. Okay? At the school one of the schools I was at in New Zealand, we were on the 3rd or 4th floor, and the nearest bathroom was down the stairs. And yeah, one of the learners didn't quite make it. Okay? No, wasn't that way. No. So yeah, they did end up messing up the stairwell a bit. And being a bit embarrassed about that. When we did it with last year's year 12s, you'll know them because they're now year 13s, presumably. Yes. There was one particular student who came in. Oh yeah, I got this. I'm gonna do really well at this experiment. And they were the person who we chose as being the representative consumer. Okay. They made one mistake right near the start of this particular experiment, and it cost them. All right? to the extent where at the end of the experiment, they did have to rush rather rapidly to the bathroom. All right? So just, it's not a terribly dangerous experiment at all. All right, in case you're wondering, his name is Andrew. All right, not the same Andrew, right, different Andrew. All right, and he is quite tall. Yes, and he plays basketball. Oh, I got this. No, you don't. So we'll have a go. And one of the other current year 13s refers to the experiment as one of the worst experiments in their life. All right. But I find it funny. Now, there was a New Zealand version we used to do where we changed the ingredients up. I have made it nicer for you. Okay? Because one of the ingredients that we used to use in New Zealand was half segments of bananas.
Okay, bananas.
Yeah. You can imagine the problem with the half segments of bananas. Repeated consumption. Yeah. Really didn't work particularly well, particularly with the other product you will be consuming too, which some of you already know what it is. Yes, Coca-Cola is the answer to the question. Right? No. That was the mistake Andrew made. Right. So, yes, we will be experimenting with Coca-Cola on Friday. Feel free to join us. And we will be seeing if, with each consecutive consuming quantities of Coca-Cola, whether your levels of satisfaction decline or not. That will be the theory that we will be testing. We will see what happens. It is quite a fun experiment, but you do have to know your limits, and we're going to critique the whole thing. We're going to say, but what about this situation? What about that situation? And it's going to lead us very nicely into some behavioral economics, which we're then doing the following week. And it's going to lead us into very nicely part of our market model that we're going to analyze, which is called demand. Right? And it's going to dovetail with what we're going to see, hopefully, something called the law of demand, which is going to come from this particular theory that we're going to look at Friday. Right. Soon. Right, laws, we've said, laws can be funny. Right, now I did make a point about how we use models in economics, and we do. We have lots of different models that we use. You won't get to see all of the models in IB that we have. No, you'll get to see all of the IB models that we use, but not all of the economics models that we have. We have lots, okay, more than you can imagine. And each new academic study that comes out will potentially have more and new different models that can possibly be analyzed. Right? We will be basing our models on the theories, the laws, but also thinking very carefully about how interchangeable the concepts can be. And we're going to be using the different models across sometimes entire topics. Right? So we might develop a model in microeconomics, continue it all the way through, and then when we get into year 13 and we're looking at international economics, use that same model. All right? Because it works. Yay, models. Now, some models, as we said the other day, are purely descriptive, other models aren't. So therefore, some models will need more explanation. Okay, and that's a little bit of also a preview of what you are going to need to be able to do for your IA, your internal assessment, your coursework, so to speak, is that you are going to use the models in an analytical way. Right? You are going to decide whether something that has happened is the right thing for it to have happened. You're going to evaluate it using the theories, using the models. Did we do this one? Okay, so here you go. New theory, new point, new terminology. Again, this is still how we think. We need to be able to do something called refuting, which isn't the name of some weird Russian guy who looked after the Tsar's daughter. Yeah? Few of you got that reference. I'm amazed. There were some year 11s who were hanging around outside, because they do. They like the place, hang around. And they were discussing going around in circles. I don't know why. So I went up near them, socially distant, mind it, and I just asked them if they were discussing Dante's Inferno. They just looked at me.
Oh my God.
One understood. He laughed. The idea here is called refutation, which is a really awkward word. Please don't name any of your children it. No. Right? Refutation. What we're meaning is it has to be possible to prove or disprove. If it's not possible to prove or disprove, then we've got an issue. Because that idea is supposed to be the one of the very foundations of science. Have you heard about a guy called Karl Popper? No? Sometimes he pops up. He should come up in your TOK discussions. Karl Popper. He's one of the big scientists who talks about refutation, who talks about how important it is in science to be able to prove or disprove something. And if you can't, then strictly speaking, you can make an argument that it's actually not scientific. Yeah? He has particular laws and rules that he puts into place with regards to the establishment of refutation, right? And those rules are going to then tell him whether this is possible to be refuted or not, and therefore is it scientific or not. So it is quite a significant thing, and I would imagine at some point in your TOK-ness, you will be learning about him, because that's a principle thinking person, which is different from Mr. David Griffith. He's a different principle thinking person. Yeah, that one all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, another word for it is, and I apologize because they're like, what are they, multi-syllable words. Here we go. Falsifiability. Oh, I tell you, weren't you glad you did English at some point today? Falsifiability, which is a fancy way of saying refutation, as in you're able to prove or disprove. It is possible something can be false. Now, I know in today's age, it seems it's impossible to prove if something is true or false or not, particularly if it comes out of a certain Donald's mouth, right? Yeah, we'll move on, okay? But according to science and science principles, it is absolutely important that you can prove something either true or false. So if you prove it and it's false, it's still scientific. Does that make sense? It's because it's the method you're using. Yeah? The methodology is the word we talk about. So you can imagine again, in your imagining this, an examiner asking you the question about economics and whether it is a valid science, right? Whether it is valid to call it a science, whether you can apply the same principles of science to economics, yeah, that sort of frame. Then this is going to be a big part of it. Because as we are going to discover, this can be an issue for economics. It can be for physics as well, as we've already discovered. Principle, law of gravity, for example. Is there such a thing? Right? So therefore this is something that will become a problem. So yes, you can lay an argument about the scientific nature of economics. You can. Here's a quick quiz for you. It should be a relatively straightforward. It should be a yes, a no, a not sure, and is he an ID? I should probably have changed that answer to, isn't that Mr. Kyle? No. Richard, now I say Thaler, but that might just be my Kiwi accent. So you might pronounce it in a different way. I apologize if I'm offending anybody by pronouncing his name wrong.
I mean, you know.
Right, so what do we got here? Chicken rat. Who's chicken rat? Why did everybody look at Joel at that particular moment?
And we just looked at
Everybody looks immediately at Joel. Chicken rat. Really? All right, chicken rat. Okay. Meowix.
Yes.
Max?
Yes.
Meowix. All right. If you ever go to New Zealand, I'm going to say not a nickname to use.
drug.
All right, just saying.
Okay.
Don't walk around calling yourself Meowix in New Zealand.
Why? The drug?
No, just you won't come across as being the most manly of people if you walk around calling yourself Meowix. Just saying. All right, you'd run the risk that somebody would beat you up just because of your name. Okay. Okay. Probably best not to execute jokes. They tend not to like that.
At least he didn't push it out.
Fine, we'll do some. Right, now,
Who is upstairs?
let's see if the internet works and is strong enough for this. If it doesn't, I might need to consider something else. Ah, it's there. Okay, now, I can't guarantee that the internet will be strong enough, right, because we had issues with it this morning. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this. It will, every now and then it will stop, and it will ask you a question to answer. Yeah? Okay. Chicken rat. That doesn't sound like a Kendrick name.
I also know who it is.
Go with it.
Who is it?
You don't know who it is.
Who's chicken rat? Who do you think chicken rat is?
Okay. Yeah, understand. But why you would call yourself chicken rat in any case? It's probably very nutritious. Now, so the video will play. I'll turn the light off so that you can see it better. Now, this actually will answer the question that we saw before. Who is Richard Thaler? He's going to be in the video. All right.
Why markets, individuals, consumers, and businesses behave the way they do. But there's a growing school of thought that says the traditional answers to those questions may not be the correct ones. Paul caught up with one of the leading thinkers changing the way we look at economic behavior as part of his series, Making Sense, which airs every Thursday on the NewsHour.
In part of Richard Thaler, an academic revolutionary who thinks his field, economics, has a weirdly distorted view of human behavior, that we're all rational maximizers, mathematical machines who use our unusually big brains to wisely calculate every decision as we strive to get to the top. thus creating perfect markets to make us better off. Yet, says Thaler,
After the 87 crash, when the market fell 20% in a day, and the internet bubble, when the NASDAQ went from 5,000 to 1,400, and then the real estate bubble, which led to a financial crisis from which we're still trying to extricate ourselves, the idea that markets work perfectly is no longer tenable.
Thaler is running his revolution from inside the belly of the beast. The University of Chicago, which boasts 28 Nobel laureates, practiced in traditional economics. Collectively, they created what's known as the Chicago School, predicated on the perfect efficiency of markets in which prices rationally reflect all available information.
What is the basic underlying assumption made by the Chicago School of Economics? Told you there'd be questions.
Oh. Keep going, keep going. That was not mine. I don't know. It's not the number of question marks.
Not no answer.
It's got to be a better answer than chicken.
Maybe chicken wings with BBQ sauce.
Well, I want buffalo wings. Boneless buffalo wings or something. Boneless wings are just chicken nuggets. No, they're not chicken. Not even.
The actual meat.
It's just meat.
All right.
Chicken tenders. Yeah.
Yeah, we-
And go.
Economics correspondent Paul.
Oh, you're gonna start from this side.
Sorry.
At a lunch with star students, Thaler offered his latest favorite example of markets behaving badly. A closed-end stock fund called the Hertzfeld Caribbean Basin Fund,
Ticker symbol CUBA. Now, needless to say, it cannot and does not invest in Cuba. That's against the law. And there wouldn't be anything to buy anyway. There are no traded securities in Cuba.
Now, typically, the shares of closed-end funds, which simply own a basket of stocks, should be worth more than the stocks themselves. Otherwise, you can save money by just buying the stocks yourself.
Nevertheless, the day that President Obama made an announcement that relationships with Cuba would be eased, this fund shot to a 70% premium. And
Why do you think that the price of the fund increased after President Obama's announcement?
Oh, he's president at the time. So he was 6 years ago. What shop on?
Right? What is the? It's an investment fund, just like a group collective
Because he's in
investment.
What are they talking? No, he said that. Wait, but how many close end stocks? Less than stocks. And then people just buy stocks.
What did you say? I don't know about to ease the relationship.
What is the fund? What
Okay.
is the fund?
Yeah,
What is the
you might be getting caught up in too much of the detail. Okay? Don't panic too much, yeah? The fund is simply like a group of people who've all gathered their money together to invest in the stock market, okay? Trusting that it will invest in stocks and shares that will make them a return. That's all. Okay? But it's one pot of money, as opposed to you going into the market and buying your own shares and choosing which company to invest in. That part of the story actually isn't needed. Yeah? What he's saying is, why did the price go up when President Obama made an announcement? Good question. Somebody's asking the right question. What did he make an announcement about? He made an announcement about Cuba. So President Obama made an announcement about normalizing relations between America and Cuba. What's the name of the stock fund? What's its code? Cuba. So why did the price of the stock fund go up? Because people thought it was Cuba. Yes. So what he's trying to show you is that you assume people are smart, you assume people are rational, you're assuming people are making, complicated calculations and decisions, but the reality is that they made a mistake based on the name. They saw the name and thought it meant one thing. They heard President Obama saying something, so then they thought, oh, the share price will go up, I better invest in that. It makes about as much sense as an investment strategy and investing in a company because you like the name of the company. Yeah, but essentially what we're saying is that somebody is able to manipulate a market, all right, in this case accidentally, just by speaking. Whereas the current president of the United States manipulates the market somewhat directly and deliberately by making comments through tweets usually about specific businesses, and what happens as soon as he says it, the stock market goes up, the price of that company goes up. Yeah. So what he's saying here is that the people investing in it made an assumption that the stock had something to do with Cuba, when it has nothing to do with it. All right. So that assumption that they made caused them to decide to invest in it, making the price go up. But it has nothing to do with supply and demand necessarily. It has nothing to do with a perfect market. It has to do instead with people's weird assumptions and connections that people make. It has to do with the weirdness of people and our behaviors as opposed to a market. Yes, good. YX, whoever YX is. A good point. Because people are stupid.
Does invest in firms likely to benefit from economic development throughout the Caribbean, including Cuba. But that doesn't explain why shares of the fund are now worth a whopping $140 for every $100 worth of actual stocks in the fund.
Cuba. Good. Price goes up. Would you say that's consistent with a rational, efficient market?
Taylor started noticing such market anomalies early in his career as an economist.
The market would go up in January. It would go up on Friday, down on Monday.
What did he notice about the stock market? Yeah. He's a very clever man. Very clever man. Tim. Do I have a Tim as well? Tim. Back to Mark. Tim. No. Yeah. Yeah, not necessarily randomly, somewhat that it moves kind of predictively, but for no particular reason. Yeah. So, for example, more stock markets crash on a Tuesday than any other day of the week. Yeah. More stock markets crash in October than any other month of the year. And there's no specific reason why other than behavior. That's why. People's behavior, right? So people in the stock market world, as soon as you get to the month of October, it's October, right? Particularly at the moment. People are going to be a bit nervous, yeah? And if you have a Tuesday in October, yeah, a bit of nervousness, yeah? The reason why the behavior is Tuesday is because the stock market actually does okay. There starts to be wobbles, there starts to be concerns, usually around about a Friday. Then it's a weekend and the stock market's closed. Then you come back on a Monday. Everybody's going, oh, it's Monday. Ooh, yeah, we're still not sure. Tuesday. Yeah. That's why maybe having TOK on a first thing on a Monday morning probably not the best idea. Yeah. Sit at home thinking about it. Oh no, I've got TOK on Monday morning. Yeah. Might not. All right. Yes. Good.
Today, his version of economics, behavioral economics, has finally taken hold. A story that he tells in his new book, Misbehaving. It's a hit even here in Orthodox Chicago, where the book's very price is an example of economic irrationality.
My book is 30% off, and people love deals. They can be driven to purchase things that they don't really want if the deal is good enough.
By contrast, Chicago school economists long argued that if someone chooses to buy Thaler's book, say, or anything else, that's proof enough that they want it at the price being paid. Deal or no deal.
What is the difference between the Chicago school approach to pricing decision and Thaler's? This bit actually connects quite a bit with what we are going to discuss and discover in our behavioral economics section. By the way, you can still buy his books. He's got several of them. Sorry? Probably discounted, yeah. Wouldn't surprise me. I was at university when he won the Nobel Prize, and it was a whole big, it was huge, it was a whole big deal. It was the quantum shift, if you will, in thinking, because all of a sudden we were now thinking maybe what we are doing doesn't work the way we think it works. Maybe we need to change what we're doing. So all of a sudden, universities all around the world added behavioral economics courses, added degrees in behavioral economics. And to be perfectly honest, it's coming around again. It went away for a little bit, seems to be coming back now. So my advice to the year 13s is if they're looking at going to university to do courses at the moment, if they're doing interviews with university people and they're asking you what books are you reading, they're asking you what interests you at the moment, behavioral economics is a fantastic thing to discuss. Right? Really good books to have a flick through, have a read, have a good discussion with them about, because they will know it and it will be a sign of critical thinking and intelligence and all of those other sorts of things. Not accepting the standard classical economic approach. Very good. Absolutely right. Yeah. So what he's referring to is he's referring to some framing, but he's also referring to something called nudge theory, which we're going to look at. Right.
All human behavior, says Taylor, was reduced to similar absurdities, usually accompanied by mathematical equations.
Marry the optimal wife. Get divorced when the utility of being married turned negative.
But it was only when Thaler began doing experiments and publishing them that doctrinaire economists, whom he calls econs, began to admit some of the errors of their ways. Take the concept of sunk costs, time and money already spent. An econ assumes everyone knows when to quit, cut their losses, move on. This group of Cameroonian students at first seemed to get that.
Let's suppose you bought tickets to go to a concert over here at this fancy dance show, $40 each. And the group is okay, but then it starts to rain. How long do you think you're going to stick around this concert?
Not much. But what if the sunk costs suddenly swell?
How many of you would have a different decision about staying or leaving if it was $500 as opposed to $40? Every single one of you.
I have to make my money work.
You have to make your money work.
Yeah.
And your point here?
Well, economists would say, how much you paid for the ticket? Tough luck. If it's $40 or $500, you should just decide whether the music is worth the annoyance of the rain.
Then there's the way most people value their time. As when Riley Gaunt is shopping for a $40 pair of shoes, learns they're on sale for $30.
But it's another store 10-minute drive away. Would you go?
Probably.
Okay.
But what if she's shopping for a $200 dress that she learns another store is selling for $190?
You think you'd go?
No. But
What would you do in the case of the shoe and the dress example, gender notwithstanding? All right.
How long is it? 10 minutes.
Yeah. Would you go, if you're saving $10 on the shoes, would you go 10 minutes down the road to get the pair of shoes, the other pair of shoes?
Is it walkable? Or
Yes.
walkable distance?
Yeah, why not? If it's $10 on the dress, would you go?
Exactly. The exact thing.
Yeah, let's say. You might be able to see the point that he's trying to make and figure it out pretty quick.
But it's the exact same.
Right. Good. Now, what you're probably quickly figuring out is what he's trying to show you is that if you value $10 as $10, if it is worth your time in one example, it should still be worth your time in another. Yeah? Because it's still the same amount. So therefore, it doesn't make rational sense for you to have a different decision. It should be perfectly logical. But people aren't rational. People are going to see the more expensive item and say to themselves, well, it's more expensive. And it's only $10. I'm only getting $10 off it. But the cheaper item, it feels to you behaviorally like a better deal. The shoes and clothes thing throws a lot of people off. But you've got airline tickets is a classic example. That gets used quite a bit with regards to this. Yeah, so there are lots of different situations that you could possibly imagine this. The technology that you use is a more generic product. How far would you go? How much would you pay for the computer, the iPad, the phone? If you were to go just to the next store down and there was a discount, but the discount was only 5%, yeah, would you still go and get it? Yeah, it's those sorts of questions. A rational consumer should. But so what he's attempting to show you is that people don't always behave rationally when they're making decisions.
But you see the point, right? If 10 minutes is worth $10 to you, it doesn't matter how you save the $10, no?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Now that you've heard this explanation, would you change your answer?
No, probably not.
So, Charlie, her boyfriend, Charlie Ellis, had his own distinctly non-econ approach to personal finance.
Are you pumped about the final?
I'm so pumped. I'm ready.
We take this on the eve of the Stanley Cup Finals, eventually won by the Chicago Blackhawks.
Suppose I told you I had 2 tickets to the first home game, about 10 rows behind the penalty box.
I would be super excited.
Now, let's suppose I gave you those 2 tickets.
How much would he demand to sell those tickets?
Man, maybe $500 if I could get that.
500 each?
I'll pop, yeah.
And how much would he pay if he had to buy the tickets?
Maybe 200.
Okay, so about half.
Yeah.
Now, an econ would say the price to buy or sell should be about the same. But not a human, and not our cameraman, a diehard Blackhawks fan himself who'd heard the entire previous exchange and then gave exactly the same answers.
I would not pay as much as I'm going to sell it for.
And this is after he's heard you do this already.
Yeah, you know, teaching the principles doesn't make people do it.
After nearly 4 decades of trying to prove just how crazy economics can be, Richard Thaler is now running the asylum as president of the American Economics Association. Its behavioral economic theories have been put into practice by governments around the world, including ours, in so-called nudge units, based on his previous bestseller. Not bad for a guy who thought he'd never get tenure for such unconventional work. And how does he now feel about being called the inventor of behavioral economics?
One guy can't create a field, but you can get people thinking.
And so he has. This is Paul Salmon reporting for PBS NewsHour from ever more sensible and unorthodox Chicago, Illinois.
Yeah, not a place I've ever been to, Chicago, so I don't really know it particularly well. Anybody been there? Good. Is that where MIT is?
No.
MIT somewhere else?
MIT's in Massachusetts.
And that's somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to know. But they're absolutely right. The Chicago School of Economics is huge. So when you look down those branches of famous economists, you're going to find a large number of them coming from the Chicago School. All right, so the fact that that occurred all in that one place is quite remarkable. It honestly is. Okay. That is a lead-in to what we will be discussing in the new week, where we're able to then say, okay, these are the theories for economics, but behaviorally, we don't quite match them. Okay? We aren't the rational calculators that economics thinks we are. So again, you can make the connection between economics as a science and a social science. We're talking about complex people with weird brains. I don't know why I looked at you, Nisa. I wasn't suggesting that you had a weird brain. You just happened to be in my vision. Okay? People think unusually. People behave weirdly. All right? But what economics is going to be able to tell you, particularly, hold on, I'm in the dark. Here I am. All right? What economics is going to be able to teach you is that we can still apply the laws, the tools, the theories, but we just need to create perhaps more behavioral ways to do it. So that's where the things like the nudge theory come into it, and something else which we're going to look at called choice architecture, which doesn't mean that you look at a building and go, oh, choice, bro, that's pretty choice. Oh, I like what they've done there with the roof. Ruth. Not to be confused with someone called Ruth. Because if you don't have someone called Ruth, then you're ruthless.
No, no, no.
And Sharaf says, man, I wish I was back. Home's been distance learning. Right? Being around this insanity is just a bit too much. Now, okay, so we need to move on. So here's how we do that. Right, as promised earlier, checking I've still got time. All right, as promised earlier, we are going to look at a new model. Okay, so you've already looked at model number 1, the supermodel, all right, the PPC. Yeah, now you're going to look at another model, which effectively is another supermodel. You look like you were about to applaud. Okay, all right. And for those of you who have done economics at IGSE level, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, tell me something different, right? Please don't panic. I am able to make it intensely complicated very quickly. But I'm going to go slowly to start, all right? Because there are a number within the room who have not done economics at IGSE and online. So they will need this to be as step by step as we can do it. Okay? And what I thought I would do is the old-fashioned approach, and I'd actually write it on the board. As scary as that sounds, particularly for me, but I will try. All right. Okay. So firstly, we need a title. I quite like world champion. Okay. Title. No.
Oh.
Okay. Please don't panic if my handwriting is not particularly clear.
Not clear either.
Yeah, go for it. Yes, just make sure once you have finished using it that you use the blue stuff, which Max seems to be rather attached to. Readable? Well done. All right. I will explain as I go through. If you have questions, please ask. Stop me at any time. It doesn't matter if we need to do this again at a later stage. Right? Really doesn't matter. This particular model is known as the circular flow model. And it is a supermodel. And kind of there's a hint in the title as to what it's going to look like. It's going to look circular, all right? Nisa agrees, therefore it must be. If in doubt, ask Nisa. Yeah, all right. So, the circular flow model. We're going to start, as said, very straightforwardly. It is a model of the entire economy, again, like the PPC, but bigger. So, how we do it is we do it very straightforwardly, very simply. I might use some of my sticky mats. We'll see if they work. Okay, what we need to do firstly is we need to make sure that we have everybody on board. So we're going to have a group of people here who live in a house. So we're going to call this the household. right? They're the people who are so physically strong they're able to pick up the house. Are you holding that house? Yes. Right. A household is quite simply just a group of consumers who live together. I'm not interested in how many. I'm not interested in if they are related. Doesn't make a difference. They're just a group of consumers who live together. For the previous cohort, the year 12s who were year 12 last year, who are now year 13s this year, I did a whole big thing about, this is mum and dad and these are the kids. And yes, I did think of that. And, I thought, you could have Giraffe as the dad and Arena as the mum and Fatima as the kid. I did think of that. But then I thought, no, you would be too embarrassed by such a thing. Yeah. So, and I should really grow up from such juvenile jokes. But, one day I will. One day. Right. Households. Households. They're on one side. The next group we are going to call businesses. All right? So at the most basic level, this is what you have in this model. You have what are called two sectors. Sector 1, households. Sector 2, businesses. So if you imagine this particular economy, that's all there is. Just that. So straightforward. What we can imagine then is something called a circular flow. Flow like water. That's water. All right? So we're going to have a flow. Here we go. Now I'd like you to have a go at the flows. That rhymed. Yeah? Also, almost a rap when you really think about it. Go with the flows. Wikipedia. No? No? Andrew's got that written down, all right, for his rap battle. Andrew versus Max in a rap battle. Goodness me, who would win?
Neither wins.
All right. Here's the flow. Ah! There's the flow. Just like that. You've got a flow going from households to the businesses. Now, it's a circular flow, so therefore, there has to be a flow going from the businesses to the households. Now, as said, the IGSI students are going to see this and go, oh yeah, piece of cake, know this one. Okay, good. Well done. All right. The rest of you, this is going to be a bit new. That's okay. This is not the last time we're going to see this model. All right, it plays a particular prominence the closer we get to what's called term 3. Term 3. All right. So, households here are going to give something to the businesses. All right. The first thing that they're going to give them is labor. All right. The factors of production. The resources. Because these are the people who own the resources, just as you own yourself and you choose to rent yourself out to a business.
The bullying is so bad. The bullying is so bad.
Didn't like that idea? No? Okay. Right? So the labor resources, all of the resources owned by the households are given to the businesses, and they are going to use those. They're going to use those resources, and they are going to produce goods and services with those resources. So you can see that there's a flow happening like that. Now, it's not too different from your PPC when you think about it, because if we were to increase this flow here, we could end up with another flow, a bigger flow here. And that would then be economic growth.
It's all similar.
Yeah.
So it is showing that in circles.
Yes. Now, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, in a country called England, you may have heard of it, there was a very famous, well, he wasn't an economist, he was an engineer, but he did study economics, and he heard about this particular model. And he was so obsessed with it that he decided to build it physically in the real world. And because he was an engineer, he did it. And it has become known as one of the world's first computers. And it was called the Moniac machine, M-O-N-I-A-C, Moniac machine. And the guy who invented it, his name was Bill Phillips, who you are going to see again in the future. But Bill Phillips is very famous for winning the Nobel Prize in economics. But he is also very famous because A, he's not an economist, he was an engineer, but B, he was a Kiwi, like me. Yes, he spent most of his life in the UK, but he was actually born in New Zealand. He is New Zealand's only Nobel Prize winning economist so far.
Are you going to do the next one?
If I can come up with a Moniac machine or something like that,
You never know.
well, you never know. You don't. All right. Now, labour resources go there, goods and services go back there. That's absolutely fantastic. Is that a whiteboard market? Yes, it is. Of course, two things need to be added to our circular flow, because another flow needs to go here and another flow needs to go back here. Right? Because what you need to see is, you're going to need to see a payment. Right? In this case, it is wages, rent, interest, profits to the owners of the factors of production. They need to be rewarded for owning those factors of production. So there is, in a different color, see, a money flow, whereas the other flow was a physical flow. Yeah. This one here is another money flow from the households to the businesses. What one's that one? You probably pretty quickly figure out what the households have to give as money flow to the businesses. Payment for goods and services. No problem. Right. So again, if you want to see economic growth with this model, we've seen this increase, we've seen that increase, so it should lead to an increase here and an increase here. Bigger flows, yeah? Which is what you want in the shower, bigger flows.
So the bigger the flow, the more arrow, the thicker the arrow? Or like...
Yeah. Yep. Now, when Bill Phillips did this, remember he did it as an actual physical machine. So it had pumps and levers and reservoirs filled with actual liquid. And the liquid, you could imagine them coloring the different liquids. And then he turns a handle and the liquid moves from one place to another. And you can see that reservoir build up. Because then what you're actually able to do, you can quickly do this, okay, is you could actually put actual numbers there. And you could see how big the economy was. And you could see what would happen if there was an increase in payment for goods and services. What would happen if we all of a sudden discovered more oil? And this market just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. this economy gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? So a very valuable tool before computers, when they quite literally were doing this all by hand. Right? Now we can and will make this more complicated, but not today. For today, let's just leave it at 2 sectors. We are eventually going to build it up to 5.
Wonderful.
Including taxes.
Oh yeah, we're going to have a look at all of that. We're going to discuss what it all means. You can see all it all. You can critique it yourself as well as you go. All right, but that will be us for the day. Please, pink stuff for the desks, blue stuff for your hands. You can nominate someone. Otherwise, as we say in the land of my birth, make it up. This means goodbye for now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. See you. Have a good day. Yes, I will. I will. Turning off now.